Due to the graphic nature of this content, listener discretion is advised. We're still continuing the case of Dean Allen Corll, and where we left off was the participation of Elmer Wayne Henley. So where we leave off is that he actually was one of the participants of the thing. So, what's up? Yeah, so I'm at work, guys. Like we had said in the previous one, we do get interruptions throughout the whole thing. So, pardon interruptions. You're gonna hear some weird shit, people talking, whatnot. I'm just gonna keep rolling with it because, hey, that's life, right? In the winter of 1971, Brooks introduced Henley to Corll. Henley was likely lured to Corll's address as an intended victim. However, Dean evidently decided to keep the youth around because he decided he'd make a good accomplice. Offered him the same fee as he did Brooks, the same fee of $200 for any boy he could lure to his apartment, informing Henley that he was involved in a white slavery ring operating from Dallas. So that was one of the ruses he had played with Henley, saying that he was going to he was going to sell into a sex slavery. And yeah. So I'm just going to read a little thing that I found on Murderpedia. So let me remind you guys, Murderpedia is like Wikipedia for serial killers. I've been reading off of Wikipedia. This is one of the things. Hold on. Alright, guys, sorry for the pause. I'm trying to find this one's passage. Wow, I can't find it, guys. Oh no. Alright, I'm back to wherever. Henley later stated that for several months he ignored Dean's offer. However, in early 1972, he decided to accept it because his family were in dire financial circumstances. Henley then said the first abduction he participated in occurred during the time Dean resided on 925 Schuler Street and the address that he moved to on February 72. Brooks otherwise claimed that Henley became involved in one of the abductions while Corll resided at the address he had occupied immediately prior to Schuler Street, which means he lied about when he started joining in on these sadistic abductions and murders. If Henley's statement is to be believed, the victim was abducted from the Heights in early February or early March. In the statement Henley gave the police following the arrest, the youth stated that he and Corll picked up a boy at the corner of 11th and Stoodwood, lured him to Corll's home on the promise of smoking marijuana with the pair. At the Corll's residence, using the ruse that he and Corll had prepared, Henley offered he cuffed his own hands behind his back, freed himself with the key hidden in his back pocket, then duped the youth in donning the handcuffs before, observing Corll bind and gag him. Henley then left the youth alone with Corll, believing that he was to be sold in a sex slave ring. The identity of the first victim Henley assisted in abducting remains unknown. So, like I said, guys, with modern technology now, modern DNA testing and all that, they actually were able to identify some of the not all of the remaining unidentified victims, but I think up to 5. There's one that was not identified. They're still looking for possible living relatives of the said youth that has not been identified. I will get to that when it comes to 1 month later, on March 24th, 1972, Henley and Brooks Corll encountered an 18-year-old acquaintance of Henley's named Frank Aguirre, leaving a restaurant on Yale Street where the youth worked. Henley called Aguirre over to Corll's van and invited the youth to drink beer and smoke marijuana with the trio at Corll's apartment. Aguirre agreed and followed the trio to Corll's home in his Rambler. So this is actually a pattern they would do. They would lure them with the promises of alcohol and marijuana. Back in the day, weed was very illegal, and they would go ahead and try to get the party started that way. And when the youth was incapacitated, that's when they would make their move, pounce on them and tie them up and gag them, and Corll would have his way with them and then end up either killing them by strangulation or shooting them in the head. So okay, Aguirre smoked marijuana with the trio before picking up a pair of handcuffs Corll had left on the table. In response, he pounced on Aguirre, pushed him under the table, cuffed his hands behind his back. Henley later claimed that he had not known of Corll's true intentions toward Aguirre when he had persuaded his friend to accompany him to Corll's home in the 2010 interview. He claimed he had attempted to persuade Corll not to assault and kill Aguirre once Corll and Brooks had bound and gagged the youth. However, Corll refused, informing Henley that he had raped, tortured, and killed the previous victim he had assisted in abducting, and that he had intended to do the same with Aguirre. Henley subsequently assisted Corll and Brooks in hiding or burying Aguirre's body at the High Island beach. So, he actually let both of them, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, both lured their own friends to be murdered by Corll, because Corll was giving them money for each boy. And despite their revelations that Corll was in reality killing the boys he and Brooks assisted in abducting, Henley nonetheless became an active participant in the abductions and murders. 1 month later, on April 20th, he assisted Corll and Brooks in the abduction of another youth, a 17-year-old named Mark Scott. Who was well known to both Henley and Brooks, so he was a good friend of those. Apparently, he was a good friend of them both. So was grabbed by force, who fought furiously against the attempts by Corll to restrain him, even attempting to stab his attackers with a knife. However, Scott saw Henley pointing a pistol towards him, and according to Brooks, Scott just gave up. I think once he saw the gun, he just said, fuck it, I'm done. I think he already knew what was coming towards him. So, unfortunately, he did meet the same fate as Aguirre. He was raped, tortured, and strangled. And he was also buried at the High Island beach. Brooks stated Henley was especially sadistic in his participation in the murders committed at Schuler Street. Before Corll vacated the address on June 26th, Henley assisted Corll and Brooks in the abduction and murder of two youths named Billy Balch and Johnny Delorme. How do I say Delorme? Delorme. And, pardon me for messing that up. I'm trying to read fast. In Brooks' confession, he stated that both youths were tied to Corll's bed, and after their torture and rape, Henley manually strangled Balch and then shouted, "Hey, Johnny," and shot Delorme in the forehead. With the bullet exiting through the youth's ear, Delorme then pleaded with Henley, "Wayne, please don't," before he was strangled. Both youths were both buried at the Highland Beach. So, there were several places that they hid the bodies: in the rented boathouse, by the lakeside, by the log cabin that Corll's family owned, Lake Sam Rayburn, and at High Island Beach. So, during the time Corll resided at Schuler Street, the trio then lured a 19-year-old named Billy Rittinger to the house. Rittinger was tied to the plywood board, tortured and abused by Corll. Brooks later claimed that he persuaded Corll to allow Rittinger to be released, and the youth was allowed to leave the residence. So, I was one of the ones that was actually saved by Brooks. On an occasion during the time Corll resided at Schuler Street, Henley knocked Brooks unconscious as he entered from the house. Corll then tied Brooks to his bed and assaulted the youth repeatedly before releasing him. Despite the assault, Brooks continued to assist Corll in the abduction of the victims. So because of him begging for that other kid to live, Brooks was punished by being raped by Corll. Also, being knocked out by Henley is kind of like a fucked up thing, After vacating Schuler Street residence, Corll moved to an apartment on Westcott Towers, where in the summer of 1972, he was known to have killed two further victims. The first of these victims, 17-year-old Stephen Sickman, was last seen leaving a party held in the Heights shortly before midnight on July 19th. The youth was savagely bludgeoned about the chest with a blunt instrument before being strangled and buried in a boat shed. Approximately 1 month later, on or about August 21st, a 19-year-old named Roy Bunton was abducted while walking to his job as an assistant in Houston shoe store. Bunton was gagged with a section of Turkish towel and his mouth bound with adhesive tape. He was shot twice in the head and buried in a boat shed. Neither youth was named by Brooks or Henley as being a victim of Corll. Both youths were identified as victims in 2011. So this is what I'm talking about with the updated DNA testing. Some of the boys were not identified, and then with the modern testing, they were later identified through DNA samples from relatives that are still living and people that are in the database. On October 2nd, 1972, Henley and Brooks encountered two Heights teenagers named Wally J. Seminole and Richard Hembry. Walking to Hembry's home, Seminole and Hembry were enticed into Brooks' Corvette and driven to Corll's Westcott Towers apartment. That evening, Seminole was known to have phoned his mother home to have shouted the word "Mama" into the receiver before the connection was terminated. The following morning, Hembry was accidentally shot in the mouth by Henley, with the bullet exiting through the neck. Several hours, both youths were strangled to death, subsequently buried in a common grave inside the boat shed, directly above the bodies of James Glass and Danny Yates. So they were already stacking bodies because they were running out of room, apparently. Sometime the following month, 18-year-old Oak Forest youth known to both Corll and Henley named Willard Branch disappeared while hitchhiking from Mount Pleasant to Houston. He was gagged and emasculated body. His gagged and emasculated body was buried in a boat shed on November 15th, 19-year-old Heights youth named Richard Kempner disappeared on his way to a phone booth. Kempner was strangled and buried at High Island Beach. Altogether, at least 10 teenagers between the ages of 13 and 19 were murdered between February and November of 1972, 5 of whom were buried at High Island Beach and the 5 inside the boat shed. On January 20th, 1973, Corll moved to an address on Wirt Road and Spring Branch, District of Houston. Within 2 weeks of moving to this address, he had killed 17-year-old Joseph Lyles. Lyles was known to both Corll and Brooks, and he had lived on Anton Drive, the same street upon which Brooks resided in 73. On March 7th, Corll vacated his Wirt Road apartment and moved to 2020 Lamar Drive, and an address his father had vacated in Pasadena. So he actually moved into an old house where his father lived. No known victims were killed between February 1st and June, between February and June in 73. Corll was known to have suffered from a hydrocele. So the hydrocele, guys, is a serous fluid and body cavity. It's an accumulation. So what that is, guys, is actually let's see. It's not cancer. It's more like an infection, a chronic infection of the testicles. So hydrocele testis is an accumulation of fluids around the testicle, which is caused by petroleum wrapped around the testicle, called tunica vaginalis. I can't pronounce that fucking word to save my life, guys. Fucking A. Provided there is no hernia present, it goes away without treatment within the first year. So what can cause that is excessive production of fluid within the sac, through defective absorption of fluid, by interference of lymphatic drainage of scrotal structures, connection with the hernia of peritoneal cavity in a conjugal variety, which presents so there's a lot of there's kind of causes to that. What it could turn into is testicular cancer if not treated. It could be treated, but depending on if they take a biopsy of that or CT scan of that, it becomes something else. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Alright, back to where we were at. He had a hydrocele because, yeah. And it was probably painful to the point where he couldn't do anything anyway, so people were safe between February and June 4th. But in early 73, contributed to the inactivity. In addition, around the time of Lyle's murder, Henley had temporarily moved away to Mount Pleasant in an apparent effort to distance himself from Corll. These facts may account for the sudden lull in killings. So, because of that, lack of activity, Henley decided to move away for a while. Nonetheless, from June, Corll's rate of killings increased dramatically. Both Henley and Brooks later testified to the increase in the level of brutality of the murders committed while Corll resided at Lamar Drive. Henley later then compared the acceleration in the frequency of killings and the increase in the brutality exhibited by Corll towards his victims to being like a bloodlust, adding that he and Brooks were instinctively known when Corll was to announce that he needed to do a new boy due to the fact that he would appear restless, smoking cigarettes, and making reflex movements. On June 4th, Henley and Corll abducted 15-year-old William Ray Lawrence. The youth was last seen alive by his father on 31st Street. After 3 days of abuse and torture, Lawrence was strangled before being buried. Sorry, guys, I cannot talk right to save my life. At Lake Sam Rayburn. Less than 2 weeks later, 20-year-old Raymond Stanley Blackburn was abducted, strangled, and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. On July 6th, Henley began attending classes at the coach's driving school in Bel Air, where he became acquainted with 15-year-old Homer Louis Garcia. The following day, Garcia phoned his mother to say he was spending the night with a friend. He was shot and left to bleed to death in Corll's bathtub before he was buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. 5 days later, 17-year-old John Sellers of Orange County was bound, shot to death, and buried at High Island Beach. In July 1973, after Brooks married his pregnant fiancée, Henley temporarily became Corll's sole procurer of victims, assisting in the abduction and murder of 3 Heights youths between July 19th and 25th. Henley claimed that these 3 abductions were the only 3 that occurred after his becoming the only accomplice to Corll in which Brooks was not a participant. One of these victims, 15-year-old Michael Bulch, the brother of previous victim Billy Bulch, was last seen by his family on July 19th on his way to get a haircut. He was strangled and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. The other 2 victims, Charles Cobble and Marty Ray Jones, were abducted together on the afternoon of July 25th. Henley later himself buried both youths' bodies in the boat shed. So, what we do know, children, is that he actually did kill a brother of a victim that he had murdered in previous years. And the fact that Brooks had taken a pause because of him getting married and his fiancée was pregnant. So, on August 3rd, 1973, Corll killed his last victim, a 13-year-old boy from South Houston named James Stanton Jamala. Jamala was abducted by Brooks and Corll while riding his bike in Pasadena and driven to Lamar Drive upon the pretense of collecting empty glass bottles to resell. So, back then, you could, recycling was big. Glass bottles were, you could get a pretty penny for glass bottles and whatnot, cans. At Corll's home, James was tied to Corll's torture board, raped, tortured, and strangled with the cord before being buried in the boat shed. Brooks later described Jamala as a small, blonde boy whom he bought a pizza in, whose company he had spent 45 minutes before the youth was attacked. So, even though Brooks stopped, procuring victims for Corll, he was actually still present around the murders. Alright, guys. So, we're coming in close to Corll's death. For those of you guys who don't know, he was not killed in prison, or he did not die in prison, or was executed. He was actually murdered by one of his accomplices. So, remember that guy Frank Aguirre, guys? Something else is gonna happen. Okay. So, 15-year-old Rhonda Louise Williams, guys. This is the name that's gonna stick with you for a minute. On the evening of August 7th, 1973, Henley, aged 17, invited 19-year-old Timothy Cordell Curley to attend a party at the Corll's Pasadena residence. Curley, who was a casual acquaintance of Corll's, who was intended to be the next victim, accepted the offer. Brooks was not present at the time. The youths both arrived to Corll's house, where they had sniffed paint fumes and drank alcohol until midnight before leaving the house to purchase sandwiches. Henley and Curley then drove back to Houston Heights, and Curley had parked his vehicle close to Henley's home. Henley exited the vehicle, and then, hearing a commotion across the street emanating from the home of his 15-year-old friend Rhonda Louise Williams, walked towards her home. Williams had been beaten by her drunken father that evening and accepted Henley's invitation to join himself and Curley at Corll's home. Williams climbed into the back seat of Curley's Volkswagen. The trio then drove to Corll's Pasadena residence. So, the thing with Rhonda, I'm just going to say this, guys. Frank Aguirre was with Rhonda Williams. That was his girlfriend before Frank Aguirre was murdered by Corll. So, let me pull this up real quick. Bad to the bone. This song cracks me up. Alright, so hold on, guys. I'm still trying to find my source. I had my notes and yeah. Okay, so let me remind you guys. I said, remember Rhonda Williams? She was the fiance of Frank Aguirre. So Rhonda was actually kind of seeing Henley at the time before, this is why he felt bad and took her with him to the party. This is one of the other websites that I found regarding them. This is what leads up to Corll's death. So, this is actually from the Houston Press. Alright, so I'm going to read you guys a passage from that after I read you this. So, approximately 3 a.m. at the morning of August 8th, Henley, Curly, and Williams they all three returned to Corll's house. Corll was furious that Henley had brought a girl to his home, telling him in private that he had ruined everything. Henley explained that Williams had argued with her father that evening and did not wish to return home. Corll then appeared to calm down and offered the trio beer and marijuana. The three teenagers began drinking and smoking, with Henley and Curly sniffing paint fumes as Corll watched them intently. After approximately 2 hours, Henley, Curly, and Williams each passed out. So, what they didn't say in the beginning was Henley was kind of seeing Williams because he felt bad for her for killing Aguirre. So this is what they were saying on one of the other posts I found on the web. Like I said, we got to follow each kind of little lead or whatever, but it's kind of okay, I kind of get why he brought her to the party to the party house. So Henley woke up to find himself lying on his stomach and Corll snapping handcuffs onto his wrist. His mouth had been taped shut and his ankles had been bound together. Curly and Williams lay beside Henley, securely bound with nylon rope, gagged, and with adhesive tape lying face down on the floor. Curly had been stripped naked. So it's most likely Curly was probably already, assaulted. Noting that Henley had woken, Corll removed the gag from his mouth. Henley protested in vain against Corll's action, whereupon Corll reiterated, that he was angry with Henley for bringing a girl to his house and that he was going to kill all three after he assaulted and tortured Curly. So apparently he did not rape Curly yet, but he was about to. He said, "Man, you blew it bringing that girl," before shouting, "I'm going to kill you all, but first I'm going to have my fun." Then he repeated kicking Williams in the chest. He repeatedly kicked her in the chest. So this is actually what I'm going to read you guys, and this is from the Houston Press. The girl on the torture board, Rhonda Williams, opens up about being attacked by Dean Corll. So she was actually interviewed by the Houston Press, and this is actually the article they had wrote about her. She wakes up to a sharp pain in her side, so it's someone kicking her, telling her to wake up, bitch. For a moment, she thinks it's her dad. Then she opens her eyes to see it's Dean Corll, the electrician who's renting this house in Pasadena. She looks over to see her friend Wayne Henley handcuffed, feet bound, his mouth duct taped shut. He looks to the other side. There's boy Tim. She hadn't met until the night before, when she escaped from her father's home in the Heights. He was tied and taped up too. Dean's berating her as she looks down. Her own body realizes it's also been tied. Dean never liked her, never liked any girls, but this is unexpected. Dean disappeared before she passed out, retreated to his bedroom, saying something about having to work in the morning. The three plopped down on the living room carpet and got to feeling good. Wayne and Tim were huffing acrylic paint from a bag, and all three shared shots of Wayne's dad's moonshine. She had taken a puff of a joint, and when one of them passed her way and the lights went out. Dean walks over to Wayne, slips his arms under the teenager's shoulders, and carries him into the kitchen. Dean must have taken off the tape of Wayne's mouth because all she hears is two voices. So she actually was hearing people talk. So she could recall what was happening to her when that night when Corll was about to kill her, Tim and Wayne, but apparently Wayne was obviously let go. So let's see. Okay. Before lifting Henley to his feet, dragging him into the kitchen and placing a .22 caliber pistol against his stomach, threatening to shoot him, Henley claimed Corll, promising to participate in the torture and murder of both Williams and Curly if Corll released him. After approximately 30 minutes of the discussion, Corll agreed and untied Henley. Then carried Curly and Williams into his bedroom and tied him to opposite sides of the torture board. Curly on his stomach and Williams on her back. So Corll then handed Henley a hunting knife and ordered him to cut away Williams' clothes, insisting that he would rape and kill Curly, and Henley would do likewise to Williams. Henley began cutting away to Williams' clothes as Corll undressed and began to assault and torture Curly. Both Curly and Williams had awakened by this point. Curly had been writhing and shouting at Williams. As Williams, whose gagged Henley had been removed, lifted to her head and asked Henley, "Is this for real?" To which Henley answered yes. Williams asked Henley, "Are you going to do anything about it?" Henley then asked Corll whether he might take Williams into another room. Corll ignored him, and as Henley grabbed Corll's pistol, shouting, "You've gone too far. You've gone far enough, Dean." As Corll clambered off Curly, Henley elaborated, "I can't go on any longer. I can't have you kill all my friends." Corll approached Wayne, saying, "Kill me, Wayne." Henley stepped back a few paces as Corll continued to advance upon him, shouting, "You won't do it." Then Henley fired at Corll, hitting him in the forehead. The bullet failed to fully penetrate Corll's skull. He continued to lunge towards Henley, whereupon the youth fired another 2 rounds, hitting Corll on the left shoulder. Corll then ran out of the room, hitting the wall of the hallway. Henley fired 3 more times into his lower back and shoulder as he slid down the wall in the hallway outside the room where the 2 other teenagers were bound. Corll died as he fell. His naked body was laying towards the wall. Henley later would recall having shot Corll. The sole thought in his mind in the moments immediately thereafter that Corll would have been proud of the way he had behaved during this confrontation, adding that he had been training him to react quickly and forcefully, as this was exactly what he had done. So they actually posted a picture of Dean Corll, his naked body facing the wall, so you could just see where they shot him. This is on Wikipedia, so yeah. After he had shot Corll, Henley released Curly and Williams from the torture bird, and all 3 teenagers dressed and discussed what actions they should take. Henley suggested to Curly and Williams that they should simply leave, to which Curly said, "No, we should call the police." They agreed and called up the Pasadena Police Department and Corll's telephone directory. So, 8:24 on August 8th, 73, Henley placed a call to the PPD, and his call was answered by an operator named Velma Lyons. In his call, Henley blurted to the operator, "Y'all better come right here, right now. I just killed a man." Henley gave the address to operators, 2020 Lamar Drive, Pasadena, as Curly, Williams, and Henley waited upon Corll's porch for the police to arrive. Henley mentioned to Curly that he had done that, killed by shooting of 4 or 5 times. 5 minutes later, a PPD patrol car showed up at 2020 Lamar Drive, and 3 teenagers were sitting on the porch. The police officer noted that the .22 caliber pistol on the driveway near the trio. Henley told the officer that he was the individual who made the call and indicated that Corll's body was laying inside the house. After confiscating the pistol and placing Henley, Williams, and Curly beside the patrol car, the officer entered the bungalow and discovered Corll's body inside the hallway. He returned to the car, read Henley his Miranda rights. In response, Henley shouted, "I don't care who knows about it. I have to get this off my chest." So you guys, if you guys don't know what Miranda rights are, this is what the Miranda rights are. So, people who, it's like something like police say when they arrest you. So, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. If you do not have an attorney, one will be provided for you. I've written your Miranda rights. Do you understand? This is when you get, arrested. And you have to, this is, there we go. I think I kind of fucked it up. So you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you any questions. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. I just fucked that all thing up. I can't read right now, guys. I'm I don't know. I'm excited because I'm almost done with this one. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy reading serial killer stuff to you guys, but sometimes some of these cases get to you, and when you're at the point of dreaming about this shit, you're just glad to be, it's glad it's almost over. It's like the Casey case. I was having nightmares because of it. I wasn't seeing Casey's face, and then I was seeing pictures of the victims that were, taken away, and once you start doing research and stuff about this, and you start getting, like, you know, into it, and fucking consumes you. So I'm like, as much as I'm glad this is almost over, I just can't read right now. Plus, it's almost time for me to go. So, Curley later told detectives that before police had officer had arrived to Lamar Drive, Henley had informed him, "If you wasn't my friend, I could have gotten $200 for you." And that's where we leave off, guys. So tomorrow we are going to be tonight, Thursday night, we will continue on with the last bit of the whole thing, including the unidentified victims, possible additional victims, incarcerations, the trial, the indictment, accomplices, confessions. So what we all do know is all who the method of murder, weapons of choice, methods of choice, what happened to Dean Allen Corll. He was shot repeatedly by Elmer Wayne Henley, and you know, he saved 2 people, you know, in the process, as long as himself. I mean, it's fucked up what happened, but yeah, one monster's dead, but the other 2 were still alive. So with that being said, kitties, I am going to stop here. You guys have a good rest of your morning or good night if you guys are going to sleep. Be sure to share this podcast. Thanks for listening. Wear a mask. Stay safe. Don't take rides from strangers. And yeah, see you in the next one. Bye, guys. This is Odd Broad signing out. Thank you for listening to Odd Pods with the Odd Broad. Have a good one.